Every single day, the boy would leave a plate of food for a homeless man on a bench in the local park. But on one particular day when he returned, he saw a millionaire surrounded by bodyguards. The world was still asleep when tiny bare feet touched the cold floor of apartment 302. Luke, just 5 years old, moved silently toward the living room window, guided by the first light of day that began filtering through the gaps in the curtains. It was a routine that had started a few weeks ago, waking up even before his grandmother, just to watch the park that stretched out 3 floors below. With small, eager fingers, he gently pulled back the worn curtain, his brown eyes immediately seeking the solitary figure who, as always, was already occupying the moss-green bench beneath the large fig tree. The man was there, as still as the tree that sheltered him, his faded brown coat blending into the early morning shadows. "Luke," a soft voice called from behind him, filled with sleepiness and maternal concern. "Already up, my dear?" The boy turned to his grandmother, his eyes shining with that early morning intensity only children seem to have. "He got here first again, Grandma." Marie approached the window, her slippers lightly sliding across the floor. Age had painted her hair silver, but her movement still held the grace of someone who had spent a lifetime caring for others. She placed a gentle hand on her grandson's shoulder, observing the familiar scene below. The apartment they lived in was modest, located in an old building that had seen better days. The walls, though clean, showed signs of age with small cracks and peeling paint, but Marie had transformed every corner into a cozy home. Luke's colorful drawings adorned the walls like gallery art, and well-cared-for plants occupied the windowsills, bringing life to the simple space. "Grandma," Luke began, his voice taking on that serious tone kids use when they're about to say something important. "He never has breakfast." Marie blinked, surprised by the observation. It was true. In all the mornings they had watched the mysterious occupant of the bench, they had never seen him with any kind of food. He just sat there for hours on end, barely moving. "How do you know, honey?" "I watch every day," Luke replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And Ms. Cecilia said breakfast is the most important meal. She said our body is like a car and needs fuel to run." Marie smiled at the simple yet effective analogy. Her grandson was growing up, absorbing the world around him with insatiable curiosity and an ever-expanding heart. "You know, Grandma," Luke continued, now pressing his nose against the glass and leaving a small foggy mark, "I think he must be really hungry." The comment hung in the morning air like a heavy cloud. Marie felt her heart clench. As a grandmother, she knew all too well the weight of making sure there was enough food on the table. Her small pension barely covered the basics, and she often skipped meals to ensure Luke always had enough. "Can we give him some food?" The question came suddenly, accompanied by that look Marie knew so well. Wide eyes, slightly raised eyebrows, and a subtle quiver of the lower lip. It was the look Luke wore when something truly mattered to him. Marie hesitated. Her mind quickly calculated the already tight monthly budget, the pending bills, the need to buy new school supplies for Luke. But there was something in her grandson's expression, a mixture of hope and determination, that reminded her of her own childhood, of the lessons in generosity her mother had taught her, even during the hardest times. "Please, Grandma," Luke insisted, now clutching the hem of Marie's robe with his small hands. "Miss Cecilia also said we should help people who need it." Marie felt tears welling up in her eyes, which she quickly hid by brushing away some stray hairs on her grandson's head. "Yes, my love, we can make something for him." Luke's face lit up like a little sun, and he hugged his grandmother's legs with all the strength his small arms could muster. "Thank you, Grandma. Can I help make breakfast?" "Of course you can," Marie replied, already feeling her heart warm with her grandson's excitement. "Let's go to the kitchen." The tiny kitchen of apartment 302 quickly filled with life and movement. Luke climbed onto his special stool, a gift Marie had made for him, painted light blue with little yellow stars. It was his observation post and his perch for helping out in the kitchen. "What are we making, Grandma?" Marie opened the fridge, mentally checking what they had. How about scrambled eggs? We have bread to toast as well. And coffee, Luke added enthusiastically. Grown-ups need coffee in the morning. You always say that. Marie chuckled softly. Yes, coffee too. Together, they created a small morning symphony. Water bubbling for coffee, bread popping in the toaster, cups clinking as they were arranged. Luke insisted on cracking the eggs, which led to a few shells ending up in the bowl that Marie discreetly fished out when he wasn't looking. "Grandma," said Luke, watching her stir the eggs in the pan, "do you think he'll like it?" "I'm sure he will, my love." Food made with care always tastes special. As they prepared breakfast, Marie noticed how totally absorbed her grandson was in the task, his tongue peeking out at the corner of his mouth as he carefully placed slices of toast on the plate. There was a seriousness in his actions that contrasted with his usual childlike energy. "All done," Luke announced when they finished assembling the meal. The plate held freshly scrambled eggs, 2 slices of toast, and an orange. Luke insisted on including, because fruit is important. A thermos of coffee completed the meal. Marie helped Luke bundle up properly for his mission. It was a cool fall morning, and she made sure he wore his favorite blue coat and the scarf she had knitted for him. "Are you sure you want to do this, honey?" she asked one last time, adjusting the scarf around his neck. Luke nodded with determination. "I'm sure, Grandma, nobody should be hungry." Marie felt tears threatening to spill again. How could such a young child have such a big heart? Moments like these made her grateful for the chance to raise her grandson, despite all the difficulties they faced. Their first encounter with the man in the park was a moment Marie would remember forever, watching anxiously from the window. Luke carefully crossed the park, balancing the plate covered in aluminum foil and the thermos of coffee. His small figure looked even tinier next to the planters and trees. The man didn't move when Luke approached. He remained seated, head bowed, hands resting on his lap. Up close, Luke could see that the brown coat was more worn than it looked from the apartment window, with small patches on the sleeves and missing buttons. "Good morning," said Luke, his clear and confident voice cutting through the morning stillness. "I brought you some breakfast." For a tense moment, nothing happened. The man stayed motionless, as if he hadn't heard. Luke glanced briefly at the apartment window, where Marie gave him an encouraging wave. "They're scrambled eggs," Luke continued, placing the plate and the thermos carefully on the bench next to the man. "My grandma makes the best scrambled eggs in the world. There's also an orange, because fruit is important for your health." Finally, there was movement. The man turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Luke's briefly before returning to the ground. He didn't speak, but his right hand moved slowly toward the plate, touching it as if to confirm it was real. Luke smiled, feeling he had accomplished something important. "I'll bring more tomorrow," he promised, before turning and running back to the building where Marie awaited him at the door. "He took it, Grandma!" Luke exclaimed as soon as he entered, his eyes shining with excitement. "He looked at me." Marie hugged her grandson, her heart brimming with pride. "You were so brave, my love." Thus began a routine that would become the centerpiece of mornings in apartment 302. Luke woke up before the alarm, eager to start preparing breakfast. Marie adjusted her budget as best she could, sometimes taking on extra orders for cakes and pastries to ensure there was always something to share. The menu varied according to what they had, sometimes just bread with butter and coffee. Other times they managed to include fruit, or even a slice of cake Marie had baked to sell. Luke insisted on helping with every detail, from choosing what to serve to setting up the plate. The man never spoke, but Luke began to notice small changes in his behavior. His hands no longer trembled as much when he picked up the plate, and occasionally he lifted his head a bit more when he heard footsteps approaching. On rare occasions, there was even brief eye contact. A week after starting his mission, Luke had a new idea during breakfast. "Grandma," he said, chewing his toast thoughtfully, "can I make him a drawing?" Marie smiled, pouring him more milk. "I think that's a wonderful idea, honey." That night, Luke dedicated himself to his artwork with all the seriousness he could muster. Using crayons, he drew 3 figures, himself recognizable by the blue coat, his grandmother, with silver hair and an apron, and the man in the park, all holding hands under a smiling sun. At the top of the page, he wrote in his clumsy child's handwriting, "Friends." The next morning, along with the usual breakfast, Luke left his drawing carefully folded next to the plate. "I made this for you," he said, his voice trembling slightly with nerves. It was the first time the man took something directly from Luke's hands. His fingers, still shaky, unfolded the paper with care. For a long moment, he stared at the drawing, and Luke could have sworn he saw a different kind of light in his eyes. From that day on, each breakfast came with a special gift, sometimes a new drawing, other times a simple note with words Luke was learning in school, or small flowers he picked on the way. The man placed every one of them in the pocket of his brown coat, with the same care he showed when receiving the food. Marie watched all of this with a mixture of pride and concern. She noticed how her grandson had changed since he began his mission of kindness. Lucas, always a sweet child, had developed an even greater sensitivity to the needs of others. At school, the teacher remarked how he had started helping classmates who were struggling, sharing his lunch or offering support during activities. Mornings became the most precious time of day for Luke. He practically jumped out of bed when he heard his grandmother's alarm, eager to start preparing breakfast. Sometimes Marie found him already in the kitchen, reaching for ingredients on the lower shelves. "Easy there, little one," she would say fondly, helping him climb onto his stool. "We've got time." The park, once just another place in the neighborhood, turned into the stage for a silent story of compassion and human connection. Neighbors began to notice the unusual routine of little Luke and his mysterious friend. Some watched with distrust, others with admiration, but all were touched in some way by the boy's determination to help a stranger. One particularly cold morning, Luke insisted on taking an extra blanket from his bed. "He must be freezing, Grandma," he argued, his big eyes pleading for permission. Marie hesitated only for a moment before helping him fold the blanket in a way he could carry along with breakfast. She watched from the window as Luke approached the bench even more carefully than usual. "I brought this so you won't be cold," he said, placing the blanket after setting breakfast in its usual spot. The man looked at the blanket for a long moment before extending his hand to take it. His fingers lightly brushed Luke's during the exchange, and the boy noticed how cold they were. "Thank you," the man said, his voice rough and low, almost a whisper. It was the first word Luke had ever heard from him in all those weeks. The boy stood there, stunned for a moment, his eyes wide with surprise and joy. His face lit up with a smile so bright it could have warmed the entire park. "You're welcome," he replied enthusiastically, before running back home to tell his grandmother about this exciting development. Marie listened to Luke's animated story about the man's first word with a smile on her face, but also a twinge of worry in her heart. The more time passed, the more questions she had about this mysterious man. Who was he? Why was he there? Did he have a family? Where did he go when he wasn't on the bench? The following days brought small changes, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying attention. The man began lifting his head more when he heard Luke's approaching footsteps. His eyes, once always on the ground, now occasionally wandered toward the boy's face as he talked about his school day or his latest drawings. One morning, after a month of this new routine, Luke came home from school especially excited. "Grandma, Grandma, my teacher taught us something new today." Marie, finishing up some tidying in the kitchen, smiled at her grandson. "What was it, my love?" "She said sometimes people feel sad because they feel alone," Luke explained, climbing onto the kitchen chair. "And a friend can make the sadness go away." Marie paused what she was doing, sensing where her grandson was headed. "That's true, honey." "So," Luke continued, his voice taking on that serious tone he used for his big ideas, "I think we need to be more than just people who bring food. We need to be his friends." The simplicity and depth of Luke's conclusion moved Marie. She approached him and kissed the top of his head. "You have a heart of gold, my love." The next morning, Luke asked to leave even earlier than usual. Along with the usual breakfast and his daily drawing, he carried something special, a small red toy car, his favorite. When he arrived at the bench, The man was there waiting, his head lifted, a sight that made Luke's heart fill with joy. "Good morning," Luke said, placing the breakfast in the usual spot. "I brought something for you to see." He sat on the bench next to the man, something he'd begun doing occasionally, and showed him the toy car. "This is Speedy. It's really special because it was a gift from my dad before he went to live with the angels." The man turned slightly to look at the toy, and for the first time, Luke saw something different in his eyes, a sort of recognition, maybe even understanding. "Red," the man said, his voice a bit firmer than before. "Yes," Luke answered excitedly, "it's the fastest car in the world. Want to see?" And right there, on that crisp fall morning, something extraordinary happened. Luke started pushing the toy car along the bench, making engine noises with his mouth, and for a brief moment, so brief that Marie, watching intently from the window, might have missed it, a small smile appeared on the man's face. It was in that moment that Marie truly understood what was happening. It wasn't just about bringing food to someone in need. It was about human connection in its purest, simplest form. It was about a 5-year-old boy who, with his natural kindness and open heart, was slowly bringing light into the life of someone who seemed lost in the shadows. Weeks turned into a month, and the routine solidified into something sacred. Luke developed new mini-rituals within the overall ritual. On Mondays, he brought colorful drawings. On Wednesdays, little stories he made up with Marie's help. On Fridays, he always managed to add something special to breakfast, like a slice of cake his grandmother made to sell. The man remained mostly silent, but his words, though rare, started to come more often. "Good. Thank you. Child. Kind." Luke treasured each word like a precious jewel, reciting them to Marie each night before bed. Marie, for her part, adapted completely to the new routine. She started working some extra hours baking cakes to order, making sure there was always something special to share. The budget was still tight, but she found that Luke's happiness and the man's slow but evident transformation were worth every sacrifice. As the first month of this unexpected journey came to a close, Marie watched her grandson sleeping peacefully, exhausted after another day of his mission of kindness. Next to his bed lay his drawing for the next morning, a colorful scene of the park, with him and the mysterious man playing with the red toy car under a smiling sun. Marie knew something special was happening, something beyond her complete understanding. Her little grandson, with his instinctive kindness and innocent perseverance, was not just feeding a stranger, he was nurturing a bond that transcended words and circumstances. And so, as night fell over the city, apartment 302 rested in peace, its occupants unaware that their small acts of kindness were about to set off a chain of events that would change not only their lives, but everyone else's around them. Luke fell asleep that night dreaming of red toy cars and shy smiles, while on a bench in the park, hidden by the darkness of night, a man held onto a crumpled drawing, his eyes finally showing a glimmer of hope that had been absent for far too long. It was a particularly cold morning when Luke first noticed the watch. The sun had barely risen over the horizon, and his small hands gripped the breakfast plate tightly as he walked toward the usual bench. The man was there, as always, but something about the way he moved caught the boy's attention, a golden glint peeking out from the frayed sleeve of his coat. "That's so pretty," Luke exclaimed, his eyes fixed on the watch shining on the man's wrist. The object completely clashed with the rest of his appearance. It was an elegant watch with gold details and a leather strap which, though worn, still looked sophisticated. It stood in stark contrast to the patched coat and faded pants he always wore. The man seemed to notice Luke's gaze and instinctively pulled his sleeve down to cover the watch. But it was too late. The boy's curiosity was already piqued. "My dad had a watch too," Luke commented, sitting beside the man as he often did now. "Grandma keeps it in a special box. She says one day it'll be mine." The man lifted his eyes slightly, something he rarely did. His gaze fell on his own wrist, and for a moment a deep confusion crossed his face. His fingers touched the watch with hesitation, as if he didn't recognize the object. From the window of apartment 302, Marie observed the scene carefully. In recent days, she'd noticed subtle changes in the mysterious man's behavior. Sometimes, it was as if he was waking from a trance, looking around as though seeing the park for the first time. In other moments, his eyes shone with clarity that soon faded, like a candle flickering in the wind. Elizabeth. The name slipped from the man's lips in a whisper so low Luke almost didn't hear it. "Who's Elizabeth?" the boy asked innocently. The man gave no reply. His eyes were once again fixed on some distant point, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the coffee Luke had brought. The following day at breakfast, Luke couldn't stop thinking about the watch and the name he'd heard. "Grandpa," he asked, nibbling on his toast, "why would someone with such a nice watch sit by himself in the park?" Marie paused, her dishwashing thoughtful. It was a perceptive question, especially coming from a 5-year-old. "Sometimes, my love, people lose not just their way around town, but also lose themselves inside." Luke furrowed his brow, trying to understand. "Like when I got lost in the supermarket." "Something like that," Marie said with a smile, drying her hands on her apron. "But when we get lost on the inside, it can be harder to find the way back." In the park, neighbors were starting to notice the unusual friendship between little Luke and the mysterious man, Ms. Carmen, who lived in the adjacent building, often stopped Marie on the street to voice her concern. "Isn't it dangerous to let the boy get so close to a stranger?" she would ask, her voice laden with worry. But Marie had learned to trust her instincts, and Luke's. There was something in the man's eyes, even in his most distant moments, that conveyed not danger, but deep sadness. One morning, as Luke was setting out the usual breakfast plate, he heard the man mumbling what sounded like an address. "Palm Avenue, 1542. Office on the 10th floor. Do you work there?" Luke asked, curious. The man blinked several times, as if waking from a dream. He looked at Luke in surprise, as if he didn't expect to find anyone there. Then he slowly shook his head and went back to his usual silence. Marie began making discreet notes. Every name and address Luke said he overheard. She jotted down carefully in a little notebook. There was something about the man's manner, the moments of lucidity, the expensive watch, the addresses he would murmur, that suggested a much more complicated story than it seemed. "Thomas need to pick Thomas up from school," the man murmured another time, his fingers drumming nervously on the bench. "Who's Thomas?" Luke asked, as he unwrapped the buttered bread he'd brought. "Is he your friend?" The man looked at Luke with an intensity the boy had never seen before. For a brief moment, his eyes seemed focused and clear. My son," he whispered, before that familiar cloudiness returned to his gaze. Luke ran home that day, overflowing with excitement about the new information. Grandma, he has a son. His name is Thomas." Marie added the name to her growing list, a sense of urgency creeping into her heart. There was a family somewhere, people who might be searching for this man. The following days brought more fragments of the past. Occasionally, the man would check the time on his watch with a panicked expression, muttering about important meetings or overdue commitments. At other times, he would remain completely still, except for his fingers gently brushing the watch like a talisman. Driven by childlike curiosity, Luke kept asking innocent questions. "Where do you live? What's your favorite food? Do you like toy cars like me?" The answers, when they came, were vague or muddled, often trailing off mid-sentence. One afternoon, as Marie was folding clothes by the window, she saw something that made her catch her breath. The man stood up from his bench, something he rarely did during the day, and began walking in circles, repeatedly checking his watch. His lips moved fast, and even from a distance, she could see his agitation. Luke, who was playing in the park at the time, approached him without fear. Marie watched, tense, as her grandson gently took the man's hand and guided him back to the bench. The man followed like a lost child, his steps unsteady but trusting the little guide. "It's okay," Marie heard Luke's clear voice say. "Sometimes I get confused too, but Grandma says everything gets better after taking 3 deep breaths." Surprisingly, The man followed the boy's instructions. Seated on the bench, he took 3 deep breaths, his shoulders visibly relaxing with each exhalation. That night, after tucking Luke into bed, Marie sat at the kitchen table with her little notebook. She reread every detail she'd recorded: the gold watch, the names Elizabeth and Thomas, the address on Palm Avenue, the mentions of meetings and important commitments. "Who are you?" she murmured to herself, as the puzzle pieces started forming a clearer picture in her mind. The next day, Luke brought not only the usual breakfast, but also one of his favorite toy cars. "Sometimes when I'm sad, playing makes me feel better," he explained to the man, who looked at the toy with a distant expression. "Thomas liked toy cars too," the man said softly, his fingers lightly touching the toy. "Thomas is your son." Luke tried again, hopeful for more information. But the moment of clarity had passed, and the man returned to his contemplative state, his eyes drifting away. The car, however, remained in his hands, his fingers occasionally tracing the wheels with almost reverent care. Marie watched the scene with a heavy heart. She was increasingly convinced this man was not just any homeless individual who happened to settle in their park. There was a life story there, a life interrupted, a family who might be desperately looking for him. As she watched her grandson interact with the mysterious man, Marie made a silent promise to herself: she would find out the truth, no matter how long it took. For Luke, who had opened his heart so completely to this stranger, and for the man himself, who seemed to be struggling to find his way back through the fog of his mind. The golden watch continued to gleam on the man's wrist, a silent testament to a former life tie, holding secrets that were gradually surfacing through echoes of the past. The sun struggled to break through the heavy clouds that morning when Luke made his most intriguing discovery about the man in the park. As always, he approached with the carefully prepared breakfast, his small steps echoing in the still sleepy park. The man occupied his usual place on the moss-green bench, but something else caught the boy's attention: a golden shine peeking from the worn-out sleeve of the brown coat. "What a nice watch!" Luke exclaimed, his wide eyes fixed on the object adorning the man's wrist. It was a shocking contrast with the rest of his appearance. The watch was clearly a luxury item, detailed in gold with a leather band that, though worn, still held its original elegance. It clashed completely with the patched coat, faded pants, and worn-out shoes. The man seemed to awaken from his usual torpor at the comment. His eyes, typically distant and unfocused, locked on the watch with sudden intensity. His fingers trembled slightly as he touched the golden face, as if trying to recognize something familiar in a sea of confused memories. 3 o'clock. "Important meeting," he murmured, his voice hoarse from lack of use. "Elizabeth will be waiting." Luke tilted his head, curious. "Who's Elizabeth?" The innocent question seemed to pierce some invisible barrier. The man lifted his gaze, finding Luke's eyes with a momentary clarity that startled the boy. For an instant, there was recognition in his look, as if he truly saw Luke for the first time. "Elizabeth," he repeated, more softly this time. But the next word was lost as his eyes clouded over again, the familiar fog of confusion descending like a curtain across his face. His hands dropped back to his lap, and his gaze drifted off once more. From the window of apartment 302, Marie watched with growing concern. In recent days, she had noticed more frequent moments of clarity in the mysterious man. Sometimes he seemed to snap out of a trance, looking around as if seeing the park for the first time. In other moments, his eyes glowed with understanding that soon vanished, like a candle flickering in the wind. "Palm Avenue, 1542, the man murmured on another occasion, his fingers drumming nervously on the bench. "Suite 1003, presentation to the board." Luke, who was setting out the breakfast plate beside him, took it all in with a child's natural curiosity. To him, these moments were like puzzle pieces he didn't yet understand, but instinctively knew were important. Neighbors in the park began to notice and comment on the unusual friendship forming between Luke and the mysterious man. Ms. Carmen, from the building next door, often caught Marie at the market entrance to share her concern. "Marie, dear," she would say, her voice low and filled with apprehension, "aren't you worried about letting Luke get so close to, well, a stranger?" Marie understood the worry, but something in her heart wouldn't let her interfere with the mission Luke had taken upon himself. Sometimes, Carmen, we need to trust a child's instinct. Luke sees something in him that perhaps we adults can't. Indeed, Luke seemed to have a special gift for drawing out the man's moments of clarity. His innocent questions and unwavering presence seemed to anchor the man to reality, even if just briefly. "Do you have a family?" Luke asked one morning, while sharing a piece of cake Marie had baked. The man lifted his eyes from his coffee, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. "Thomas," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I need to pick up Thomas from school." "Who's Thomas?" Luke pressed gently. "My son," the man answered, before his eyes drifted off into emptiness again. Marie kept a small notebook, jotting down every detail: names, addresses, references to board meetings, the gold watch. Each element suggested a former life, a world far removed from the solitary figure on the park bench. One morning, the sky dawned unusually dark, and the wind carried a warning of an approaching storm. Luke ran to the window as soon as he woke up, his little brow creased with worry upon seeing the looming clouds. "Grandma," he called, his voice quavering slightly, "is it going to rain really hard?" Marie came to the window, observing the threatening sky. The morning news had warned of a severe storm heading their way, with strong winds and prolonged heavy rain. "Yes, my love," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It looks like we're in for a big storm." Luke's eyes immediately filled with tears. "But what about him, Grandma? Where will he go? He'll get soaked." Marie felt her heart tighten. It was a valid concern. The man spent his days on the park bench, exposed to the elements. A storm like the one coming could be dangerous for someone in his condition. "Grandma," Luke turned to her, his big eyes pleading, "can we invite him to stay here just until the rain stops?" The question surprised Marie, though a part of her had expected something like this. Her protective instincts immediately warned of the risks of inviting a stranger into their home. But then she thought of the gold watch, the names he repeated, those lucid moments. This man had a story, a life that for some reason had been interrupted. "Please, Grandma," Luke insisted, now tugging at the edge of her apron. "He'll get sick if he stays out in the rain, and you always say we should help those who need it." Marie looked out the window again. He was already on his usual bench, apparently oblivious to the threatening clouds overhead. Her own teachings about compassion and helping others echoed in Luke's voice. After a long moment, she sighed. "All right, Luke. We'll invite him to stay until the storm passes." The boy's face lit up with a radiant smile. "Really, Grandma? Can we go now?" "Before it starts raining." Marie nodded but gently held his arm before he ran out the door. "We have to be careful, okay? And if he doesn't want to come, we have to respect that." Luke agreed solemnly, though his eyes sparkled with anticipation. Together they went down to the park, Marie carrying an umbrella large enough for 3 people. The man lifted his eyes as they approached, a slight spark of recognition crossing his face at the sight of Luke. The boy immediately spoke up, his voice clear and confident, cutting through the heavy morning air. "It's going to storm really bad today," he announced, pointing to the dark sky. "Grandma and I want to invite you to stay at our place until it passes." The man blinked several times, his gaze shifting from Luke to Marie, then to the ominous clouds. He seemed to be processing the offer, his hands gripping the edge of his coat nervously. "We have hot chocolate," Luke added, using his most convincing argument. "And I can show you all my toy cars." Marie took a step closer, keeping a respectful distance yet offering a kind smile. "It's safer than staying out here in the rain," she said softly. "We don't have to talk if you don't want to. Just a dry, warm place to wait out the storm." The man glanced at his watch, a gesture Marie had come to recognize as his way of grounding himself in moments of uncertainty. His lips moved silently, as though he was having an internal conversation. "Please," Luke insisted, extending his small hand. Something about the simplicity of the gesture, the innocence in that outstretched hand seemed to reach him. Slowly, hesitantly, he rose from the bench. Marie noticed he was taller than she'd realized, and that, despite his worn clothing, he carried himself with an air of refinement. The first raindrops began to fall as they made the short walk back to the building. Luke gripped the man's hand tightly, guiding him as if he'd been doing so for years. Marie followed closely behind, observing how the man looked around with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Upon entering apartment 302, Marie first noticed how out of place the man seemed in an indoor setting. His eyes darted around as if trying to map unfamiliar territory. His hands trembled slightly, and he lingered near the door until Luke gently tugged his sleeve. "Come see my room," the boy exclaimed, eager to show off his treasures. "Luke," Marie interjected softly, "maybe first we should show our guest where he can dry off and rest a bit." The man looked at her with an expression Marie couldn't fully decipher. There was gratitude, confusion, and something else that looked like shame. "The bathroom is this way," she indicated. "I have clean towels and—" She hesitated a moment before continuing. "If you'd like, I can wash your clothes. I have some of my late husband's clothes that might fit you." The man nodded slightly, still without speaking. Marie guided him to the bathroom, showing him where the towels and fresh clothes were. As she closed the door, she could hear the storm beginning to howl outside, wind whistling between buildings. Luke was by the window, his face pressed against the glass, watching the now pouring rain. "Good thing he came inside, right, Grandma? He would have gotten soaked." Marie smiled, ruffling her grandson's hair. "Yes, my love. It was very kind of you to worry about him." As they waited, Marie prepared hot chocolate and set out some cookies she had baked the day before. Luke was in the living room, arranging his toys, determined to show every single one to his park friend. When the man emerged from the bathroom, dressed in Marie's late husband's clothes, she noticed a subtle change in his appearance. Clean and in dry clothes, it was even more obvious he wasn't just another person experiencing homelessness. There was a dignity in his posture, even if his eyes still seemed lost. "Look, I made a racetrack," announced Luke proudly, showing off an elaborate circuit he had set up with his toy cars. The man approached slowly, sitting on the floor next to Luke when the boy tugged on his sleeve. Marie watched, fascinated, as he seemed more relaxed playing with Luke's simple toys than during any other interaction. "This one is Speedy," Luke explained, showing him his favorite red car. "And this one is Thunder. Which one do you want?" For a moment, the man seemed confused by the question. Then, hesitantly, his fingers reached for the blue car Luke offered. Thomas always liked the blue one," he murmured. Luke beamed, handing him the car. "You can be the blue one then, let's race." Marie settled into her armchair, watching the surreal scene unfolding in her living room. The mysterious man from the park, now clean and in fitting clothes, playing toy cars with her grandson while a storm raged outside. There was something deeply moving about the way he followed Luke's enthusiastic instructions, how his shaky fingers maneuvered the car around the improvised track. Occasionally, the man would freeze, eyes darting around as if he wasn't sure where he was. In those moments, Luke would gently touch his arm and bring him back to the game, his child's voice anchoring the man in the present. "Are you hungry?" Marie asked after a while, offering him the tray with hot chocolate and cookies. The man looked at the tray as if he wasn't sure what to do. Luke immediately picked up a cookie and handed it to him. "These are the best cookies ever. Grandma made them." Slowly, the man bit into the cookie, and something in his expression changed. "Isabel," he murmured. "Isabel used to make cookies like this on Sundays." Marie mentally noted this new name, planning to add it to her notebook. Each piece of information seemed like part of a larger puzzle, a portrait of a life gradually emerging from the fog of confusion. Afternoon wore on, accompanied by the sound of the heavy rain pounding on the windows. Luke continued showing off his toys, proudly holding up his collection of children's books. The man seemed more at ease with the books, his fingers caressing the pages with a familiarity that suggested an old habit. "Do you like reading stories?" Luke asked, settling in next to him on the couch with his favorite book. I used to read to Thomas," the man said, his voice distant. "Every night, before bed." Marie, busy tidying the kitchen, paused to watch as the man began reading in a low voice, initially hesitant, but gradually gaining confidence. Luke listened intently, his eyes moving between the illustrations and the man's face. At one point, thunder boomed loudly enough to rattle the windows. The man jumped, the book slipping from his hands. His eyes darted wildly, as if he had no idea where he was. "It's okay," Luke said quickly, placing his small hand on the man's. "It's just thunder. Grandma says it's the sky making noise." The man focused on Luke, his breathing gradually steadying. "Sky," he repeated softly, "making noise." Marie approached with more hot chocolate, noticing how the man's hands shook as he gripped the cup. There was something profoundly unsettling about seeing someone so obviously educated and refined, evidenced by his moments of clarity lost within his own mind. As afternoon turned into evening, it became clear the storm wouldn't let up any time soon. Luke had shown nearly all his toys and books, and was now sprawled on the rug, drawing with crayons. "This is you," he explained, displaying his drawing, "and this is me, and this is Grandma. We're all drinking hot chocolate." The man looked at the drawing for a long time, his fingers lightly tracing the colorful figures. "Family," he murmured, and for a moment, his eyes filled with tears. Marie realized they would have to decide how to handle the night. The storm was still fierce, and sending the man back to the park in those conditions was unthinkable. "How you can sleep in my room?" Luke offered excitedly. "I can sleep with Grandma." Marie stepped in gently. "Actually, sweetie, we can set up the couch. That'll be more comfortable for everyone." While Marie fetched extra sheets and pillows, she noticed the man seemed to be wrestling with some inner battle. His eyes flickered between clarity and confusion, as if two different realities were competing for his attention. I need to go back," he murmured at one point, standing abruptly. "But it's raining a lot," Luke protested, holding his hand. "Please stay. Tomorrow I'll show you my dinosaur collection." The simplicity of the request seemed to calm him, and slowly he sat back down. Marie noticed how often he touched his gold watch, as if it helped him stay connected to the present. When bedtime finally rolled around, Luke was reluctant to leave. "Can I tell just one more story?" he pleaded, already in his space-themed pajamas. Marie allowed one last story, watching as her grandson snuggled beside the man on the couch, showing him pictures from his favorite book about stars and planets. It was incredibly moving to see a man who could barely recall his own name being so engrossed in a child's enthusiastic explanations. "Good night," Luke finally said, giving the man a spontaneous hug before heading to the bedroom with Marie. Later, after checking that Luke was asleep, Marie quietly returned to the living room. The man was still awake, sitting on the prepared couch, gazing out the window where the storm still raged. "Thank you," he said softly, surprising Marie with the clarity in his voice. For a moment, his eyes met hers, more lucid than at any point during the day. Marie nodded, feeling she was witnessing a pivotal moment. "Get some rest," she said kindly. "Tomorrow's another day." As she prepared for bed, Marie's thoughts swirled around the small clues revealed over the day: the gold watch, the names he'd mentioned, the way he read, his familiarity with books, his refined posture. There was an entire life hidden beneath the surface of his confusion, a story that needed uncovering. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin searching for more concrete answers. Starting with the wet clothes still in the bathroom, maybe they held a clue to the true identity of their mysterious guest. Outside, the storm continued, but within apartment 302 something had changed. A connection had formed, invisible bridges built by a child's kindness and a grandmother's compassion. And while the night wore on, the man from the park slept for the first time in a long while in a safe, welcoming place, his dreams filled with memories struggling to resurface. The morning after the storm dawned with a different kind of brightness, as if nature was making up for the fury of the previous night. Marie was up before the first rays of sun, her sleep troubled by thoughts about the mysterious guest now occupying her couch. He was exactly where she'd left him, sitting upright with a posture that, even in his confusion, hinted at years of refinement. His hands, as usual, played with the gold watch on his wrist, a piece that now intrigued Marie more than ever. "Good morning," she said softly, careful not to startle him. "Would you like some coffee?" He turned his head slowly, taking a few seconds to focus on her before giving the slightest nod. In the kitchen, as the coffee brewed in the old coffee maker, Marie organized her thoughts. Luke was still sound asleep, worn out from the previous day's excitement. This was the perfect chance to investigate what had been nagging at her since last night, the man's soaked clothes. The aroma of coffee filled the apartment as Marie headed to the bathroom. The wet clothes were neatly folded on top of the hamper, just as she had left them. Even drenched, the brown coat retained a certain dignity. Its seams, though worn, revealed a high level of craftsmanship. As she emptied the pockets, her fingers found something. A small object tucked into an inner pocket so discreet it could easily have been missed. It was a business card, its edges worn and yellowed, but the gold-embossed text still perfectly legible. Charles Edmund Thornton, CEO Thornton Enterprises. Marie felt her knees buckle. She had to steady herself against the sink, her hands shaking as she held that little piece of paper that might unlock the entire mystery. The name sounded familiar, like a distant echo of something she should remember. Card still in hand, she quietly returned to the kitchen. Her old laptop sat on the table. With trembling fingers, she booted it up and connected to the internet. Searching Charles Edmund Thornton made her heart race. Headlines popped up. CEO's disappearance reaches 6-month mark. Family increases reward. The Thornton mystery. Businessman still missing. Tech empire in limbo. Where is Charles Thornton? The photo accompanying the articles made her blood run cold. It was him. The same man now sleeping on her couch, though the image showed a version that looked younger, more vibrant, dressed in an impeccable suit and wearing a confident smile. The story read like a movie script. Charles Edmund Thornton, 45 years old, CEO of one of the country's largest tech companies, had disappeared after a severe car accident. His vehicle was found flipped over on a back road, with signs he'd suffered significant head trauma, but the businessman was nowhere to be seen. "My God," Marie whispered, hands covering her mouth in shock. All the pieces began to fit. The gold watch, the refined posture that surfaced even in confusion, the names he muttered. Elizabeth, his wife, Thomas, his teenage son who had created a social media page dedicated to finding his dad. "Grandma?" Luke's sleepy voice startled her, making her slam the laptop shut. "What are you doing?" "Just checking a few things, honey," she replied, trying to steady her voice. "Did you sleep well?" Luke nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Is he still here?" "Yes, he's in the living room," Marie said, her mind racing. "Why don't you go wash up while I make your breakfast?" As Luke headed for the bathroom, Marie made a decision she knew would change everyone's lives. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number listed on the Thornton Enterprises website. "Thornton Investigations Office. Good morning," a professional voice answered after 2 rings. Marie took a deep breath. "Good morning. I have information about Charles Thornton." "Ma'am, please understand we've received many calls about this case." "He's in my living room right now," Marie interrupted, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "He has a gold watch on his wrist and a business card in his coat pocket. He mutters the names Elizabeth and Thomas. He's been sitting on a bench at our local park for weeks, and my grandson has been bringing him breakfast." The silence on the other end was deafening. When the voice returned, it sounded markedly different. "Mom, please don't hang up. I'm transferring your call immediately." The next 30 minutes were a flurry of detailed questions. Marie explained everything. How Luke had started his daily kindness mission, Charles's moments of lucidity, the words he mumbled, the watch he never removed, and finally, the discovery of the business card. "How is he?" asked a new voice, more emotional than the others. "Physically, I mean," Thin, Marie replied, glancing toward the living room, but not sick. Confused most of the time, though he has lucid moments. And the watch, he never takes it off. It was a Father's Day gift from Thomas, said the voice, choked with emotion. The last thing he really insisted on taking with him when he left that morning. Marie was informed that a team, including Elizabeth Thornton, was boarding a private flight and would arrive by early afternoon. Please, Marie asked before hanging up, when you get here, come see me first. I need to prepare my grandson. In the living room, Luke had already joined Charles, eagerly showing him his dinosaur collection. This one's the T-Rex, he explained enthusiastically. He's the king of the dinosaurs. Museum? Charles murmured, his eyes momentarily focused. Took Thomas to the museum. Big dinosaurs. Marie watched, heart aching, knowing these were likely the last moments Luke would have with his mysterious friend. Around noon, as usual, Charles indicated he wanted to return to the bench at the park. You'll come back, right? Luke asked anxiously. I still have more dinosaurs to show you. Charles looked at the boy with a gaze unexpectedly lucid. Thank you, he said softly. For breakfast, for all of them. Marie watched from the window as Charles made his way back to his usual bench in the park. Her phone buzzed. The team had just landed and would be there in 30 minutes. Luke, she called gently, I need you to stay with Miss Carmen this afternoon. But Grandma, Luke protested, I wanted to show my friend more of my toys. Marie sat beside her grandson. Sometimes, honey, the people we love need to leave for a while. Not because they want to, but because they need to. After leaving a confused Luke with Miss Carmen, Marie waited at the building's entrance. A small fleet of unmarked black cars quietly parked nearby. From the first vehicle emerged Elizabeth Thornton. Even after months of searching and worry, Elizabeth carried a natural elegance, though her red-rimmed eyes betrayed her anxiety. Mrs. Martinez? She asked, her voice controlled but tense. Please, call me Marie, she answered softly. He's in the park, on his bench, as always. Elizabeth grasped Marie's hand with surprising strength. How is he really? Marie recounted how Luke's kindness had sparked change, how Charles often mumbled Elizabeth's and Thomas's names, how he never forgot them even in his most lost moments. He never truly forgot you, she concluded gently. Even at his most confused, your names kept coming up. 6 months, Elizabeth whispered, tears streaming freely. We've been searching for 6 months, and he was here, cared for by a 5-year-old angel. Marie led the group through the park. Elizabeth walked as if in a dream, her eyes locked on the solitary figure sitting on the moss-green bench. It was at this moment that Marie noticed Luke slipping out of Miss Carmen's apartment, running toward the bench, clutching something in his hands, probably another drawing. Elizabeth stopped a few feet from the bench, her hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. Charles lifted his head slowly, as if sensing a familiar presence. His eyes, usually distant, found Elizabeth's from across the space between them. Look what I drew. Luke's clear voice broke the tense morning hush. It's you with me and Grandma, and all the dinosaurs. The moment was surreal, Charles's past and present converging in a single instant. His gaze shifted between Elizabeth and Luke, as if his mind was struggling to process these two realities colliding at once. Elizabeth, he whispered, the word leaving his lips like a prayer. Thomas. Yes, Charles, Elizabeth responded gently, stepping forward. We've come to take you home. Luke stared at the scene in confusion, still clutching his drawing. You know her? Marie moved closer, placing a protective hand on her grandson's shoulder. Sweetie, remember when we talked about changes? Elizabeth knelt to Luke's level. We can never thank you enough for taking such good care of him. Charles glanced at his gold watch. Gift. From Thomas, he said, his voice clearer than usual. Yes, dear, Elizabeth confirmed, now sitting beside him. Thomas can't wait to see you. Tears welled in Luke's eyes. Is he leaving, Grandma? Marie pulled her grandson into a hug. Yes, my love, but you did something extraordinary. You helped a family find each other again. Investigators approached discreetly, preparing the next steps. There was a lot to do: medical exams, documentation, rehabilitation. But for now, in the park that had silently witnessed so many mornings of kindness, time seemed to stand still. "You can visit," Elizabeth said gently to Luke, "once he's doing better. And I'm sure he'll want you to meet Thomas too." Luke smiled through his tears, offering up his drawing one last time. Charles took it in trembling hands, his gaze more focused than ever. "Thank you," he said, the word laden with months of breakfast plates, drawings, and one-sided conversations. "My friend." Marie watched, her own heart full of emotion. The mystery of the man in the park had been solved, but the legacy of kindness her little Luke had built would resonate for a long time to come. And so, in the same park where everything had begun, one chapter ended so a new one could begin. The sun rose differently that morning, painting the sky with soft pink and golden hues that seemed to foreshadow something extraordinary. The park, usually quiet at that hour, was already unusually busy. Discreet black cars parked nearby, and well-dressed figures spoke in low voices, creating a stark contrast with the park's usual simplicity. Elizabeth Thornton stood a short distance from the moss-green bench, her body tense like a violin string about to snap. 6 months of tireless searching, of renewed hopes dashed again and again, of sleepless nights poring over old photographs, all of it led to this moment. There, sitting on the bench exactly as Marie had described, was Charles. He maintained his usual posture, seemingly unaware of the commotion forming around him. His fingers, in a gesture Elizabeth recognized instantly, toyed with the gold watch on his wrist, the gift Thomas had so carefully chosen for Father's Day, just weeks before the accident. "Charles!" Elizabeth's voice trembled at the name she had called out in both dreams and nightmares for the many months of their separation. He lifted his head with that characteristic slowness Marie had described, his eyes taking several seconds to focus on the source of the voice. When his gaze finally met Elizabeth's, something indefinable crossed his face, like a ray of sunlight piercing heavy clouds. "Elizabeth," he whispered, the word bearing the weight of half-forgotten memories. It was at that exact moment Luke arrived, following his daily routine as he'd done for months. The boy carried the foil-covered plate and thermos of coffee, taking small but determined steps. He froze upon seeing the strangers surrounding his friend. "Good morning," he said hesitantly, his childish voice slicing through the tense morning hush. "I brought your breakfast." Elizabeth turned to look at the boy, and her heart nearly stopped. There he was, the little angel Marie had described, the child who had fed and cared for Charles when nobody else knew where he was. Tears began to flow silently down her cheeks as she realized the devotion shining on Luke's young face. Charles's gaze wavered between Luke and Elizabeth, as though trying to reconcile two separate worlds that had abruptly collided. "Luke," he murmured. Then, with surprising clarity, "Elizabeth, Thomas, Dad!" The exclamation came from Thomas Thornton, who could no longer contain himself in the car where he had been waiting. The 15-year-old practically sprinted toward the bench, ignoring the hushed protests of investigators advising caution. Luke stood there wide-eyed, still clutching the breakfast that now seemed oddly out of place. "Dad?" he repeated, his small voice loaded with confusion and a hint of fear. Charles responded to Thomas's presence in a remarkable way. His eyes, usually distant, focused on his son with a rare intensity. His hands gripped the gold watch as though seeking an anchor in this emerging reality. "Thomas," he said, voice stronger than at any point since Luke had known him. "The watch. Your gift." Thomas stopped just a few steps away, tears streaming freely down his teenage face. "Yes, Dad," he choked out. "You never took it off, did you?" Just then Marie appeared, having noticed Luke's absence from Miss Carmen's place. Her heart sank at the sight of her grandson standing there, still faithfully holding the breakfast as his familiar world transformed around him. "Luke, honey," she called softly, moving closer. "Grandma," Luke turned to her, his small hands trembling. Who are these people? Why are they making my friend cry? Gently, Marie took the plate and thermos from her grandson, placing them on the bench beside Charles. She knelt to meet his eyes, searching for the right words to explain such a complicated situation to a 5-year-old. "Remember when we talked about how people can get lost?" she began. "Not just lost in a place, but lost inside themselves." Luke nodded slowly, his gaze darting to Charles, now with Elizabeth and Thomas, each holding one of his hands. "Our friend," Marie continued gently, "he was lost like that. He has a family that loves him very much and has been searching for him all this time." Elizabeth, noticing the fear and confusion in Luke's eyes, drew closer and knelt as well. "His name is Charles," she said kindly. "He's my husband and Thomas's father. 6 months ago he had a terrible accident and became very confused. He couldn't remember who he was or how to come home." Luke considered every word, his small face a portrait of conflicting emotions. But he was always here," he said, voice trembling. "On the bench, alone, needing breakfast." "Yes," Elizabeth said, tears streaming. "And you, Luke, you were his real angel. When no one knew where he was, when we couldn't help him, you were here, bringing him not just food, but company, affection, drawings." Thomas, now sitting beside his dad on the bench, rummaged in his backpack. "I brought some things to show you, Dad," he said, pulling out a carefully preserved photo album. Charles stared at the album, a mix of fascination and confusion. His trembling hands touched the pages as though trying to soak up the memories through physical contact. "Here you are at my 14th birthday, Thomas explained, pointing to a photo. "It was a few months before the accident. You'd just given me this watch." "Birthday," Charles murmured, his fingers tracing the image. "Chocolate cake. Your favorite." Luke, who had moved closer timidly, peeked at the photos over Thomas's shoulder. "He looks different in the pictures," the boy observed innocently. "He does," Thomas agreed, turning to smile at Luke. "But, thanks to you, he was never alone. You took care of him when we couldn't." Marie chose that moment to share how she discovered Charles's true identity. She recounted finding the business card in the coat pocket during the storm, her internet research, and how all the clues fell into place. "The names he muttered, Elizabeth, Thomas," she explained. "The gold watch he never removed. The way he carried himself, even when he seemed most lost. There was a story there, waiting to be uncovered." While Marie spoke, Charles remained absorbed in the photographs, each image seeming to spark small flashes of memory. Elizabeth sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders, while Thomas kept pointing out each photo. "Look at this one, Dad," Thomas said, indicating a museum picture. "You took me to see dinosaurs for the first time." "Dinosaurs?" Charles repeated, then looked at Luke. "You also like dinosaurs?" Luke nodded eagerly, a small smile lighting his face. "I showed him my dinosaur collection yesterday. He really liked the T-Rex. I used to be scared of T-Rex when I was little," Thomas confessed, forging a bond with the younger boy who had cared for his father. "I thought it would come out of the museum and chase me." Luke giggled for the first time that morning. "But T-Rex doesn't exist anymore. It's just bones now." Luke's laughter seemed to have a positive effect on Charles, whose eyes grew more focused. "Thomas," he said, voice clearer, "you've grown." Elizabeth squeezed her husband's hand. "Yes, dear. 6 months. It's been 6 very long months without you." The mention of time made Luke frown. So he won't need me to bring him breakfast anymore?" The question, so innocent and yet so profound, caused all the adults to hold their breath. Charles looked directly at Luke, and for the first time since they'd met, his gaze was entirely present. "Luke," he said, "you fed me when I was lost. Not just with food, but with kindness, with drawings, with dinosaur stories." Elizabeth impulsively hugged Luke. "You and your grandma are real angels. You didn't just feed Charles, you kept him alive, kept his humanity intact, until we could find him." Marie stood by, filled with a tumult of emotions. Her young grandson, who who had turned a simple act of kindness into a daily mission, was receiving one of life's greatest lessons. Sometimes helping someone means being ready to let them go. "Can we still come visit?" Luke asked hopefully. "I have more drawings to show him." Thomas grinned. "Of course, and I can show you my dinosaur collection too. I even have some glow-in-the-dark ones." Luke's eyes lit up at the idea, but his expression soon turned serious again. "But will he be okay? Will he remember everything?" Gently, Elizabeth explained that Charles would need medical help and specialized treatment to recover his memories and health. "But thanks to you and your grandma, he's not lost anymore. You kept him safe until we could find him." Charles continued shifting between moments of clarity and confusion, but each familiar photograph, each recognized voice, brought more fragments of memory to the surface. The mysterious man on the bench was slowly giving way to the Charles Thornton he had been, still needing care, still confused, but no longer lost in his own mind. "We need to take him to the hospital now," Elizabeth said softly. "The doctors are ready to begin proper treatment." Luke clung to Marie's hand. "Grandma, can we do one last breakfast together before he goes?" Elizabeth and Thomas exchanged emotional glances. "I think we have time for that," Elizabeth answered. "In fact, we'd love to share this moment with you." And so, on that transformative morning, the small group gathered around the breakfast Luke had prepared. Charles, seated between his wife and son, with Luke and Marie completing the circle, shared his last meal in the park, not as a lonely stranger, but as a man rediscovering his identity through his family's love and the kindness of strangers who became guardian angels. As the sun rose higher, bathing the park in golden light, one story ended while many others began. The mysterious man on the bench had found his way back home, guided by the kindness of a boy who decided no one should ever have to eat breakfast alone. And Luke, holding his final drawing for his friend from the park, understood that sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest gestures, like sharing a breakfast with someone who seems lost. Dr. Richard Mendel's office was a welcoming space, with soft-toned walls and a calming view of a small garden. That morning, the renowned neurologist was carefully observing Charles Thornton, seated in a comfortable armchair, with Elizabeth by his side. "Mr. Thornton's condition is a fascinating case of dissociative amnesia," the doctor explained, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the extensive notes and tests performed in recent days. The trauma from the accident, combined with the high stress he was under, created a perfect storm in his brain. Luke, sitting between Marie and Thomas on a small sofa, listened intently, even if not all the words made sense to his 5-year-old ears. Since the reunion in the park, he had insisted on accompanying his friend to every important appointment. "But why did he forget everything?" Luke asked, his small voice curious. Dr. Mendel smiled kindly at the boy. "Sometimes, Luke, when something very scary happens, our brain tries to protect us by hiding for a while. It's like when you shut your eyes during a scary movie." Elizabeth squeezed Charles's hand. He was shifting between moments of clarity and confusion. "Can you tell us exactly what happened that day?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The doctor consulted the police report and medical records that had since been retrieved. On the morning of the accident, Mr. Thornton was on his way to an important meeting. According to investigations, a truck lost control on a curve and forced his car off the road. The vehicle flipped multiple times before landing in a ditch. Marie felt Luke grip her hand. It was hard for him to imagine his usually quiet park friend going through something so frightening. "What's remarkable," Dr. Mendel continued, "is that Mr. Thornton managed to exit the car on his own. Witnesses reported seeing a disoriented man walking along the road, but by the time the police arrived, he was gone." "How did he get to the park?" Thomas asked, having spent months trying to piece together his father's path. The doctor spread out a map of the city and its surroundings. "From the accounts we gathered, it seems Mr. Thornton wandered for several days, disoriented. Some people saw him in different places, but because of his expensive, though damaged clothes, they assumed he was just out for a walk." "The watch," Charles murmured suddenly, touching the object on his wrist. Couldn't lose it. Thomas's gift. Yes, dear, Elizabeth said through her tears. And you never took it off, even though you'd forgotten almost everything else. Dr. Mendel made a note. That's highly significant. In dissociative amnesia, certain objects or specific memories can remain as emotional anchors, even when everything else is forgotten. Luke got up and walked over to Charles, gently placing a hand on his arm. Is that why you looked at it so much? Charles focused on the boy, a moment of clarity surfacing. It felt like it was trying to tell me something important, something about home. The park where Mr. Thornton ended up is also key, the doctor observed. It's a quiet place with a predictable routine. For a traumatized mind seeking stability, that environment was ideal. Marie remembered all those mornings watching Charles on his bench, always in the same spot, always in the same position. Then Luke started bringing him breakfast. Dr. Mendel smiled broadly. That Mrs. Marie might have been the most therapeutic element of all. The routine Luke established, the consistent human connection, the regular care, these all helped create a safe environment in which Mr. Thornton's brain could begin to heal. Luke's eyes widened. I helped him get better. More than you realize, young man, answered the doctor. Your daily visits, your drawings, your dinosaur stories, all of that helped keep Mr. Thornton connected to the world, preventing him from becoming completely lost in his trauma. Elizabeth stood and hugged both Luke and Marie. How can we ever thank you? She whispered. You didn't just feed Charles, you kept him alive, kept his humanity intact until we could find him. Thomas stepped forward, his eyes shining with gratitude. Luke, you took care of my dad when I couldn't. You're a real hero. Luke blushed at the praise, hiding his face against Marie's side. I just didn't want him to be hungry, he mumbled. And that simplicity, that purity of intention, was exactly what he needed, Dr. Mendel explained. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from the simplest and most genuine gestures. The doctor then outlined Charles's treatment plan. He would need regular therapy, specific medications, and a controlled environment for continuing his recovery. But his prognosis was good. His memories are returning gradually, the doctor said. With proper support, we anticipate significant improvement. Of course, some things might remain fuzzy, and the accident period will likely always have gaps, but Mr. Thornton has every chance of returning to a normal, fulfilling life. Marie watched her grandson taking it all in. For a 5-year-old, it was a lot to process, but Luke seemed to grasp it emotionally. So he'll get better? Luke asked, his voice filled with hope. It'll take time, Dr. Mendel replied gently, but yes, he'll keep getting better. And you know what, Luke? You started that healing process months ago, with your breakfasts and your friendship. Charles, who had been silent for a while, suddenly reached out to Luke. Thank you, he said, voice clearer than usual. My little breakfast angel. The entire office fell silent, moved by that moment of lucidity and gratitude. Luke smiled, a radiant grin lighting his face. You're welcome, he answered simply. Friends help friends. And in that welcoming room, with the afternoon sun painting soft shadows across the window, they all understood the profound truth in those childlike words. Healing doesn't always come from expected places or complicated treatments. Sometimes it comes from a plate of food offered with love, a colorful drawing, or a friendship free from any demands. The truth behind Charles's memory loss was a story of loss and trauma, but it was also one of hope and redemption, written in the simple pages of a child's kindness. Mornings in the park had changed. The moss-green bench was still there, a silent witness to an extraordinary story. But now Charles sat on it differently. No longer lost in his own memories, but like someone trying to reconnect two worlds occupying his mind. It's strange, he told Elizabeth, who now accompanied him on his morning visits. I have memories of this place, but they feel different, like a dream that was real. Elizabeth held his hand. noting how his fingers still unconsciously fiddled with the gold watch. The Thornton family had rented a home near the park, deciding to remain in town during Charles's recovery. It was easier for him to navigate therapy in a place that had become both familiar and safe. "Dad!" Thomas's voice rang out across the park. He came running, accompanied by Luke, who was carrying his beloved folder of drawings. It was Saturday, and Luke's visits had become a cherished routine for everyone. Charles smiled, seeing the two boys approach, his teenage son and the little angel who'd fed him for months. One of the complexities of his new life was balancing the love for his family with the deep affection he felt for Luke, born out of his former confusion. "I brought another drawing," Luke announced, plopping down beside Charles on the bench. "It's the new park you're going to build." The drawing depicted, with a 6-year-old's colorful imagination, a transformed park. There was a playground, a library, and at the center, the moss-green bench preserved like a monument. "It's perfect," Charles said, his voice much steadier after weeks of intensive therapy. "I think we'll use your ideas for the project." Elizabeth smiled, recalling the meeting where Charles had revealed his decision to turn the park into a modern community center. It was one of the first moments she truly recognized that her husband was returning, not exactly as he was before, but as someone profoundly changed by his experience. "But the bench has to stay, right?" Luke asked, a hint of worry in his voice. "It's our special place." "Of course it will," Thomas answered, having grown quite close to Luke in the last few weeks. "Dad, tell him about the plaque we're going to put up." Charles nodded, pulling Luke closer. "We're going to call it the Bench of Kindness. There'll be a plaque that tells the story of a boy who changed a lost man's life with breakfast and friendship." Luke blushed, hiding his face against Charles's shoulder. He was still learning how to handle the idea that his small daily acts had made such a huge difference. From a nearby bench, Marie watched the scene, smiling. The past few weeks had been an exercise in patience and understanding for everyone. There were hard times, when Charles felt overwhelmed, when Luke cried missing their old routine, when the Thornton family struggled to connect with a Charles who wasn't exactly the same as before. "It's like a puzzle," she had explained to Luke one night when he was especially sad. "Some pieces are from the old Charles, and some are from the Charles we met in the park. It takes time for them all to fit together in a new way." The metaphor helped not only Luke, but the entire family understand the process. Charles was rediscovering old memories, yet also integrating his experiences in the park, which had become a crucial part of who he was now. Flashbacks now occurred more frequently. Sometimes in mid-conversation, Charles would pause, eyes fixed on something distant, as a memory emerged clear as crystal. "Thomas was 7, he said suddenly, looking at his son. "You fell off your new bike at the park. Your knee was bleeding, but you didn't cry. You said you were as brave as a T-Rex." Thomas laughed, tears shining in his eyes. "Yes, Dad. And then you bought me ice cream, saying T-Rexes also like dessert." Moments like these gave everyone hope. Each recovered memory was celebrated. Each reconnected thread was a small miracle. Dr. Mendel had explained Charles's brain was forging new pathways, linking the past and present in a unique way. "It's as if the trauma shattered a vase," the doctor explained during a session. "We can glue it back together, but the repair lines will always remain, and sometimes those marks make the vase even more special." The decision to transform the park was made during therapy. Charles had begun talking about how the place had become his refuge, even if he didn't know why. "I want others to find here what I found," he said. "Not just a bench to sit on, but a place of hope, of connection, of new beginnings." The project, developed with active community participation, included a library, recreational areas, a community cafe offering free meals to those in need, and various social programs. Thornton Enterprises would not only fund the transformation, but also set up a permanent foundation to maintain and expand similar initiatives elsewhere. "See, Luke," Marie said gently to her grandson, watching architects present preliminary plans. Your small acts of kindness grew and grew like ripples in a pond. Luke watched with fascination. For him, who had started all this simply wanting to help someone hungry and alone, it was surreal to see how that first plate of breakfast had led to something so big. Charles's therapy sessions had also become a family affair. Luke often joined, sitting quietly in the corner of the doctor's office drawing while Dr. Mendel conducted the sessions. His presence seemed to ground Charles, especially at tougher moments. "He's like a bridge," the doctor observed to Elizabeth, "between the Charles who was lost and the Charles who's returning. The purity of their bond transcends amnesia." As the weeks went by, a new routine settled in. Mornings still started early, but now Charles occasionally prepared breakfast, welcoming Marie and Luke to his temporary home near the park. Thomas taught Luke about dinosaurs, Elizabeth shared stories of Charles, and Marie watched proudly as her grandson became an integral part of this expanded family. "So you know what I like best," Luke said one day, helping Charles feed the birds in the park, a new ritual they had established together. "You smile a lot more now." Charles paused, looking at the boy with misty eyes. "It's because I have so much more to smile about now. I have my family back, and I gained a little guardian angel in the process." The park's transformation progressed quickly. The moss green bench was carefully preserved and restored, now occupying a place of honor at the center of the renewed space. A bronze plaque telling its story was in the works, a permanent reminder of the power of kindness. "Sometimes the best lessons come from the most unexpected places," Charles said during a Thornton Enterprises board meeting where he presented the company's new social initiatives. "I had to lose myself completely to be found by the kindness of a child. And that kindness not only saved my life, it changed me for the better." Luke Deese, who didn't fully grasp the scope of what he had done, simply continued being himself, a 6-year-old boy with a heart bigger than the world. To him, the story was always about helping someone who seemed lonely and hungry. And perhaps that was the deepest lesson of all. The most transformative acts don't always come from grand gestures or elaborate plans, but from pure hearts that simply decide to do good, one breakfast at a time. "Grandma," Luke asked one night as he got ready for bed, "do you think other people will find special friends on the bench too?" Marie kissed his forehead, her heart bursting with pride. "I'm sure they will, my love. You showed everyone that sometimes all someone needs is a little kindness and a shared breakfast." And so, as the park changed physically, its visitors changed on the inside, touched by the story of the man who was lost and found, and the boy who proved that love and kindness can build bridges over the deepest gaps of both mind and heart. The morning sun bathed the renovated park in a golden light, illuminating the newly installed bronze plaque beside the restored moss-green bench. It was a special day, exactly 1 year since the reunion that had changed so many lives. Charles Thornton was sitting on the bench, now the symbolic heart of the New Hope Community Center, waiting for his little friend to arrive. His gaze wandered across the transformed space, the modern glass-walled library, the bustling community cafe, the colorful playground where children laughed and played. "Mr. Charles!" The familiar sound of Luke's voice cut through the morning air. 6 years old now, he ran through the park with the same energy as ever, though there was a new wisdom in his young eyes. "Right on time," Charles grinned, patting the spot next to him on the bench. "Did you bring breakfast?" Luke giggled, holding up the small lunchbox he carried. "Always. Grandma made those cheese rolls you like." They kept the tradition, weekly meetings on the bench, sharing breakfast and stories. Over the past year, Charles had recovered most of his memories but chose to keep alive the ritual born in his darkest days. "You know," Charles said, nibbling on a still warm cheese roll, "sometimes I think I had to lose everything to find the most important things in life." Luke looked at him with that unique blend of innocence and understanding only kids have. "Like being kind to people." "Exactly," Charles smiled. "Before the accident, I was so busy being important, making deals, that I forgot about what really matters. It took a little boy with a plate of breakfast to teach me what's truly important." The park buzzed around them as the day began. People arrived for the official opening of the community center. Elizabeth was overseeing final arrangements, while Thomas, now 16, coordinated a group of teen volunteers helping with the day's events. "I saw the papers Grandma signed yesterday," Luke said casually. "They were about school." Charles nodded. The Hope Educational Fund was one of his first initiatives post-recovery. Starting with Luke, it ensured local kids would have access to quality education all the way through college. "It's the least I can do," he replied. "You taught me that kindness creates more kindness. Now other kids will have a chance to achieve their dreams too." Luke spotted a family entering the cafe, a mom, dad, and 2 small kids. He knew they were one of the families receiving free meals through the center's social programs. "They don't have to be hungry anymore," he said proudly. "No, they don't," Charles agreed. "And it all started with you deciding I shouldn't have to eat breakfast alone." Marie joined them, her silver hair gleaming in the sun. This past year had been transformative for her as well. Beyond watching her grandson grow in compassion and wisdom, she now managed the center's social programs. "It's almost time," she said softly. "People are gathering for the ceremony." Charles nodded, but remained seated on the bench. This moment with Luke was sacred, his way of honoring the special bond formed in his darkest days. "Did you know other kids are doing the same thing?" Luke said excitedly. "I saw 3 boys taking sandwiches to a man at the park the other day." Charles felt tears in his eyes. Luke's example had inspired other children in the neighborhood, creating a ripple effect of kindness. "That's how kindness works," Charles explained. "Like ripples in a pond, one small act can touch many different lives." The opening ceremony was emotional. Charles Imi, now fully recovered but profoundly changed, spoke about how a simple act of kindness had not only saved his life, but shifted his perspective on what truly matters. "This center," he told the gathered crowd, "isn't just a set of buildings. It's a testament to the transformative power of compassion, a reminder that sometimes our guardian angels come in small packages, carrying plates of breakfast." The most touching moment came when Luke and Charles unveiled the commemorative plaque beside the bench. Inscribed in bronze was the story of how a 5-year-old boy, with pure love in his heart, had rescued a lost man through a simple daily act of kindness. Elizabeth hugged Marie, both women quietly wiping away tears. Thomas smiled, his arm around Luke's shoulders. The Thornton family had made a permanent home in the city, unwilling to leave a place and people who had become so important in their lives. After the official ceremony, a community lunch was served at the cafe. People of all walks of life mingled, sharing food and stories. It was exactly what Charles had envisioned, a space where barriers dissolved and the community grew stronger through sharing. "Grandma," Luke called, pulling Marie aside to a quiet corner. "Do you think my dad would be proud?" Marie embraced her grandson, her heart full of love. "I'm sure he would be, my dear. You turned pain into love, loneliness into community. There's no greater source of pride than that." Late in the afternoon, when most of the guests had gone, a small group remained gathered around the moss green bench. Charles, Elizabeth, Thomas, Marie, and Luke, a family formed under extraordinary circumstances. "To new beginnings," Charles toasted with his cup of coffee. "And to the kindness that brought us here," Luke added, raising his glass of juice. The sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The park, now transformed into a vibrant community center, remained a silent witness to how love can bridge the deepest gaps, and how kindness, even from the smallest hands, can change the world. Charles glanced at the gold watch on his wrist, Thomas's gift, once his sole anchor during his days of confusion. Now it symbolized not only his reclaimed past, but the precious time he no longer wished to waste. "Same day, same time, next week?" Luke asked, gathering the remains of their shared breakfast. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Charles replied with a smile. "After all, some traditions are sacred." And so, as the day drew to a close, the moss-green bench remained, silently bearing witness to an extraordinary story of loss and discovery, darkness and light, of how a simple meal offered with pure love could change not just 2 lives, but an entire community. The legacy of Luke's kindness continued to spread, like ripples in a pond, touching more and more people. And somewhere, perhaps, another little angel was deciding that nobody should have to eat breakfast alone,